Hi, everybody. Welcome to You're Missing Out. This is a little different for us. If you've been listening to the whole season, you might know what we're doing now because we've done it once before. And you can probably figure it out by the fact that we sound different than we normally do because we are not coming to you all from our respective apartments. We are, in fact, all in one room.
Well, I still sound like I just don't want to be here, but, you know, I guess there's a different context for what you're saying. Okay, I get it. It's fine.
So we are coming to you all from one place. We were all at Tom's place because we, for the film we're covering today, The Italian, we are doing a commentary track. What that means is that what you're about to hear after we do a little countdown is going to sync up with the film. You're going to get our reactions to what's going on screen, and if you want to see what's going on, you can go through all of the trouble of trying to sync this up with a film rip that you find online, or you can go to our YouTube channel. You're Missing Out has a YouTube channel. We've been putting up all of our episodes there in audio-only form. We've been putting up some reaction videos, things like that. You will be able to watch The Italian in full with our commentary track sunk up with it. We'll link to that in the show notes, too. It'll be a really fun way to experience this film. We've done this once already this season with Eric von Stroheim's Greed, and I think we had a lot of fun doing that, and we got a lot of great feedback on that, so we thought we would do that here as well. If you just want to watch The Italian and not hear what we have to say about it, you can still go to our YouTube and just click mute. That seems like a pretty easy solution, right?
Yeah, you could just not have downloaded this, you know.
I mean, yeah, that's also true. That seems...
I mean, if you listen to it at this point, I mean... and you don't want to keep listening, I don't know what to tell you. You might need to find God or something, like maybe start figuring out why you keep doing things you don't want to do. I mean, it's better than doing heroin. You know, you don't want to do heroin, but this might be just as bad on your brain. I don't know. I don't listen to the show.
So if anybody's wondering, I said this is like our episode on Greed. If you feel that this is a little different than our Greed episode, it's because when we did our Greed episode, we all got a full night's sleep. Whereas, pulling back the curtain here, we just recorded for 3 hours last night, and we are about to record for like 4 more hours today to try and wrap the season.
Hours. Yesterday was nuts.
Yeah, so we're all a little bit loopy, but thankfully, unlike Greed, this movie is not 3 hours long. So, we are talking today about The Italian from 1915. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read the National Film Registry statement on The Italian, and then we are going to start the film and try and fill this commentary track with reactions, fun facts, and whatever else might happen. I don't know how fun the facts are going to be. This movie is
I have a
shockingly bleak.
I have a fun fact to start the episode with. The Italian, that is one of the main criticisms that people thought was missing in Creed 3. Where is The Italian?
So, we're getting all of our fun out now, guys, because spoilers if you don't know The Italian. This movie takes a turn.
I don't know if it takes so much a turn, so much as it's just a steady descent into everything is bad for people that come to America.
Yeah. So, before we say any more about The Italian, here's what the National Film Registry had to say. Produced and co-written by Thomas Ince and directed by Reginald Barker, The Italian stars George Beban, a celebrated theatrical actor known for his portrayals of Italian characters, as an immigrant whose experience falls far short of the American dream. Beban's stage experience and personal appeal translated well to the screen, and he mastered the nuances of film acting better than many of his contemporaries. Characteristic of Ince's film style, The Italian is an epic production of opulent sets and costumes, expertly and inventively photographed. Ince's influence on cinema also surfaces in the film's less structured, less rigid technique, a counterpoint to the more formal classical style empowered by directors such as D.W. Griffith, who, it's worth noting, his Birth of a Nation comes out this same year, so keep that in mind as we watch.
Wonder what he thinks about Italians. Probably not much.
We're going to start, but everybody also, after the film is done, stick around because we will still have our picks for the National Film Registry. So if you're hoping to watch along with us and you want to sync it up with your own copy of The Italian, I mean, that's fine if you happen to have your own kicking around. We are going to start the film in 3, 2, 1. So, obviously, this mentions here George Beban as the lead. This is actually George Beban's first screen appearance. Now, Kyle, I know you texted me as soon as you saw this unique opening scene.
Yeah, I very much lit a joint before starting this movie, and I appreciated the fact that this movie also starts with a man smoking before beginning this extravagant adventure. So definitely knew its audience even 100 years ago.
What I like about this beginning is it makes it feel like the existence of Italians is a fairy tale.
I mean, the thing that they're actually... It
is a fable.
The thing they're actually doing here is twofold.
What if they were Italians?
Some scholars think they did this because they wanted to convey how much care George Beban takes in picking his roles. I happen to think it's also an effort to try and show how much of a transformation Beban makes, right? Because Beban was not an Italian. George Beban himself was like a child of, I think, Irish immigrants, but he was an Italian impersonator on the stage in a very moving way. I also think, especially by having Beban read a book, they're making Beban in this opening scene look like your average waspy, American, right? And trying to, I guess, convey, like, hey, you should connect to this story and find yourself in this story the same way that the man we're looking at here, George Beban and his Manson, can read this book and find his way into the story of Beppo. So I do think it's an interesting choice to basically make Beban the audience surrogate as well as the lead actor.
I mean, it's definitely interesting. I don't know necessarily if we need it, but when you think about how this really was kind of made as almost like anti-propaganda to be like, hey, like, Italians are people too. Like, let's stop treating them like they're animals from... I mean, they are from a foreign land, but they're not animals from a foreign land. It's not like we're talking about the Irish here. When you have that, like...
we should point out I am Irish. That's why Tom's doing that.
I'm also Irish. That's why he's doing that, so...
Also, you grow up in New York, all the cops are Irish, and then you really, really don't like the Irish.
I love the romanticism of that opening paragraph in the book and then cutting to this kind of church. I mean, though most of this movie is set in the Lower East Side, he did film it mostly in California. So a lot of this was done in California, but I do...
Well, it makes sense to film in California when you think about... One, California's huge. There's so many different landscapes in California, so you could go anywhere. That's why they moved from... A lot of the film industry moved from New York to California in the 1900s. But you also just think about the kind of rich history of winemakers in California. And Italy's a big wine country, so there's a similar... you could find similar landscapes and whatnot, and... I think that actually makes a lot of sense, and it's pretty smart on his part to not just go to Italy and completely blow up your budget.
I also think something very impressive about the Italy that Beban depicts here, right, is that it's beautiful, right? Like, this is the same way that Coppola would later depict Italy in The Godfather. It's romantic, it's beautiful, and I think what's interesting about that is it would have been very easy to make a story about an immigrant where you show the country that they're coming from as desolate or shitty or unappealing, and then America as the land of opportunity. And I think it's deeply important to even, in 1915, I think a pretty bold narrative in a way to kind of not take a tack of, well, America, we're the best place in the world, and every other place, it's fallen. The immigrants are coming here because it's fallen apart. No, Beppo came here for, spoilers, but Beppo comes here for work. Beppo comes to America because he's told to, right, to make something of himself. But that's not... It's not... This is not anti-Italy. This is not like...
No, this movie's anti-American.
Yeah.
This is very much about the fallacy of the American dream. That if you come here, you're coming here with no money. And if you don't have money, you're not going to be able to survive in a country that does not want you to survive. It is crazy how anti-American this is. Like, this is so anti-American and very much like, hey, we don't want immigrants coming here because we don't want to see you guys dying. You would think this would be something made in, like, the Great Depression and not 1918.
I also think, take a look at 1915, this film is.
15,
same year as Birth of a Nation. I also love the way it depicts Italy here because you have Beppo, who is shown on his gondola, and he's in traditional garb and he's traditional facial hair. But it's not showing all of Italy that way, because you're seeing this kind of westernized, or not westernized, but like modernized upper class part of Italy, right? You're seeing the people who, like, some of the Italians you're seeing, the ones who are going to hire this gondolier, right? they're dressed like you would see anybody in modern, at the time, modern, like England, France, whatever. And obviously, I mean, Tom and I are both at least, part Italian-American and can attest, like, the concept of class amongst Italians, especially northern versus southern Italians, is a thing that people still hold, even though their like great-grandparents came off the boat.
You absolutely do not want to either call a northern Italian Sicilian or remind a Sicilian that there is black blood in their genes.
Well, that's the whole thing.
Nuts about it.
Because that all comes out of to get into this. We're not that far removed from the unification of Italy. The Italian unification, which Garibaldi leads, comes from like 1848 to 1871, that big war, and Italian unification. The remnants of that are the more European, wealthier kind of northern Italians. Look down on the southern Italians, who are perceived as more poor or rural or anything like that, even though, listen, fuck you guys, Caserta has a lot of palaces and shit, but we're not getting into that now. There is this disdain, and that there is this kind of divide, and a lot of the stuff, like Tom just indicated, the thing that commonly gets brought up of like, well, you're part African, or you're part this and that. All of that is done in a way by kind of the upper class and the northern parts of Italy to distance themselves from the southern Italians, to kind of rebel against Italian unification, and to look down upon their fellow countrymen. And I think that it's fascinating that is depicted in this film as well, right? That is also a factor here, is kind of that, post, because when you think about the Italian-American diaspora, right? The first wave of that diaspora starts in like 1880, so that's already happened when this film comes out. The second wave comes about, later on, around the fascist rise. So we're in the middle of those two waves. A touch of nature makes the whole world kin. I mean, you're getting that sense of what, where Beppo's head is at. But I guess what I'm saying is, it's interesting that, Tom, you said this film's anti-American, in that way, but it's also about how displaced people like Beppo are.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't have a home in Italy, right? His Italy is changing, and he doesn't have a home in America. These people come to him. He's coming to America for, quote unquote, a better life, but it's just he's just displaced. Yeah, he has nothing.
He doesn't end up having a better life. He ends up working harder for less money, and we'll get to it when we get to it, but, some tragic things happen in his life because America is not really built for these people. It's not built for people that have to work and struggle. It's not as... whatever, argument if it's better today or not. I mean, we can get into the whole inflation, blah, 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 salaries and all that shit, but, like, even now, we still experience it, and, like, nothing's changed in 105 years of just, if you don't have money and you or your family member gets sick, things aren't going to go great for you. So. And
look at the way that people are laughing at Beppo. I think it's just, it really is important to stress, like, how much the movie is also about how Italy is changing, too.
And I also think just what you were talking about, how it's portraying Italy, and what we were talking about, its anti-American stance, is we're seeing a lot of art in these Italy scenes. People, looking at actual art or musicians playing, all of that. The architecture is art in and of itself. And then when we get to New York, it's almost brutalist and nihilistic of just how there is no joy in America. Yeah. So as much as we're getting these, people are laughing at Beppo, and the woman's father that he wants to marry is kind of a dickhead and forces him to go to America to prove that he's worthy of his daughter, you at least get the sense that there's, like, a history of joy in Italy, where we get to America, and, again, it's crazy, 1915, kind of just, like, right off the bat, just putting its finger on the pulse that America was born through misery. This is not a place that was made through good times and good vibes. It's America's kind of a cursed land, like and Poltergeist or something. You moved the headstones, but you didn't move the bodies.
And also bear in mind, I was looking this up. In 1914, the year before this film comes out, the Italian anarchist group, the Galenists, ranked at the top of the U.S. government's list of dangerous enemies.
When's Sacco and Vanzetti?
Sacco, I took note of that too. Sacco and Vanzetti are arrested in 1920.
Okay, so that's after.
So it's about 5 years after this. But the year in 1919, Galliani, the anarchist, who his pamphlets were found among Sacco and Vanzetti, get deported by the government. The Immigration Act of 1917 that demands literacy comes in. Obviously 1917. So this is all around the same time. Well, I guess it's the fact that it's not just surprising for 1915 in terms of like how long ago that was, but also particularly how pointed that is because of how strong anti-immigrant and anti-Italian sentiment was in the country at this time. You look at what Beban is doing. Beban got his start impersonating, I believe, French people, and then pivots to Italians. He was known as like the best actor of Italians because he studied Italian immigrants. Of course, now we would look at something like that, right? And the whole concept of sort of ethnic performances, and we would look at that and condemn that, right?
Well, I think he gets a big benefit because there's no sound. If he was doing an accent, that might not be the best thing.
But even then, and by the way, this is I think very interesting. The Merchant Gallia, right? And here we are talking about the Merchant Gallia, while the Gallinists, very similar sounding name, are these Italian anarchists, right? That are around in the country. So I think that it is, it's a fascinating thing. But with Beban, he was praised for this in his day because I do think that there was this understanding of there is an incredible amount of empathy to his performance, right? And to his character. I mean, even to the point where, like, Ince and I believe Reginald Barker wanted to call this movie The Dago. and it was Beban who, like, insisted, like, no, give him his dignity. Like, do not call that. Do not call it that. I'm sorry, Thomas Ince and C. Gardner Sullivan, who wrote the script.
It's funny. It's funny because I feel like nobody likes talking about this when we talk about like representation and stuff when it comes to movies. That it's never gonna be like right off the bat the person, like the group or like someone from the group doing the thing for the first time. I think of when it comes to representation, you think of like In the Heat of the Night had to be made by Norman Jewison before you can get like the blaxploitation movement where we're allowing black filmmakers to start making stuff before we get to Spike Lee and John Singleton in the late 80s doing stuff. A lot of the times it and it sucks in this fucking country, I get it, but you needed a guy like Beban to kind of take the Italian experience on his shoulders because I mean they weren't going to let an Italian do it.
Well, that's the thing. There's also the element of like you have to remember that the theater industry, which is where he gets his start in this country, was so radically segregated, right? Yeah. I mean, and not just like along color lines, but we talk about you had the Yiddish theater scene, right? And you had all of that. You had all these different ethnic groups and ethnic humor and ethnic depictions in this time are very I don't know if they certainly have an age grade, but they were very prominent and not always in a hateful way, right? You can see a poster for like Potash and Potemkin, which was an Irish-Jewish comedy duo, and I'm sure you would look at it, and I'm sure there's a lot of routines they do that make people blush now, but like there was something about like the audience themselves was going to see them, right? And it was something about seeing yourself on screen and maybe lampooning yourself a little bit, or yourself on stage and lampooning yourself, and everybody was kind of laughing at each other in this sort of vaudeville setting. So it's a little hard to kind of put yourself in those shoes now and draw the line of what was or was not. But one thing that is clear in this is Beban, whether or not, a non-Italian should be playing Italians or anything like that, like, Beban is committed to giving these characters humanity and sincerity.
Well, I mean, if we
dignity.
were being realistic about it, they should have made it. They should have got a Jew to play him. I mean, we, really get the contract signed and sealed earlier than we actually ended up.
That is, I mean, but you're right though. That is that strange thing of like because of the theater scene at the time, right? Like, I mean, throughout film history, like Jewish people have played Italian roles and Italians have played Jewish roles and Hispanic roles and all of that. There was just kind of this thing of there was a lot of in that theater scene just like, hey, if we're not accepted by polite society, we can all do each other's thing. Like we're all just guys on the sideshow. On that note, we're talking about who made this film. As we're reaching this kind of this point of Annette's father trying to decide who to pick, do you guys know anything about the people who made this film?
No,
nothing at all.
Okay. So, a quick note up top talking about just what's in the registry. Reginald Barker, who is the director, co-directed the film Civilization with Thomas Ince, which is in the registry. Ince wrote the screenplay to both Hell's Hinges and The Bargain, William S. Hart westerns that are in the registry. That's notable because Ince is considered the father of the western, right? Now, you might be familiar, Tom, with Thomas Ince if you know your Hollywood history, because Thomas Ince has a very famous death.
Oh, yeah?
The producer of this film was on a large ship owned by William Randolph Hearst. That was also... Charlie Chaplin was also aboard the ship. A lot of luminaries were on there. And he died aboard the ship. And there were a lot of conspiracy theories that somebody shot him, pushed him overboard, anything like that. And it was covered up. That is the subject of the Peter Bogdanovich film, The Cat's Meow. Remember that film?
No, I don't remember the film, but I do remember the story. No, that I remember. Okay.
By the way, I know we haven't talked much about what's on screen. Incredible shot.
Good shot, good shit.
That feels very like almost Ingmar Bergman to me. You know what I mean? Those silhouettes
very
on the
Bergman, and again, just really highlighting the naturalism of the Italy scenes compared to the just unrealism, and not unrealism in like their sets or whatever, but just their buildings. It's concrete. It's not natural.
And if you're watching this film for the first time, remember this shot because they're going to return to it later with, I think, a very good payoff. Yeah. It just is a remarkably crafted film in that regard. But I did just want to acknowledge, like, Ince and Barker are... I mean, Reginald Barker is a very influential filmmaker for his day. He doesn't get talked about anymore because I guess we only have so much we can fit in a film canon. But
and
he was an innovative visual stylist.
We've talked about this before, yeah.
But, it's a fascinating... kind of the team that worked on this. I mean, Inceville had its own key players who were all involved. I mean... Clara Williams is here playing Beppo's love, soon-to-be wife. She's also in Hell's Hinges, and she would end up retiring from acting when she married the director of this film, Reginald Barker. So it's all kind of... this was back in that era when you kind of had troops of players and everybody was sort of working together pretty closely on these things. I mean, Beban is obviously brought in for this because this is his thing.
Yeah, there's the industry isn't really an industry yet. It's just a lot of... disparate groups making their own things before kind of the grand migration to California and turning Hollywood into the industry we know it today. So it's, you get a lot of shit like that. Also, remind me at the end, because I don't want to talk about the end now, but like I've just been thinking about like sort of the Italian experience and like what happens to Beppo in the end and how it's I got to remember to talk about that in the end, but movie's really kind of got its finger on the pulse of what's going on in America and with the Italians. I think it's very fascinating.
Yeah, I mean it's there really is something about this when you look at it that it's I mean, it's certainly different than a film we covered earlier this season. It's different from a Tevye, where Tevye was made by Jewish filmmakers and Jewish actors for specifically a Jewish audience, right?
Yes.
With this film, I mean, it's very clearly made with other audiences in mind, but that's not to suggest that it's inauthentic, right?
Well, that's why it feels very much like what Jewison was doing in the 60s and 70s. It has that thing of like an outsider bringing a populist, wide-ranging perspective to something that could be a bit narrow in its audience.
I love this. 1 year do I give thee, Beppo Daddy, to win a home for my daughter. Should thou fail, she weds the merchant guy. That's not how anyone has talked at any other point in this film. And I think that's very interesting.
No, but it gives you all the exposition you need to set up for the next, 40 minutes of the movie.
Well, and also the fact that, I do think he draws a very clear line with these title cards. The title cards are all in English, right?
Yeah.
When they're in Italy, the speakers with the title cards have a lot of eloquence, right? And then, as we're going to see in a bit, when Beppo gets to America, he's talking with, I see it a film, I shine your shoes, I do it is. And I do think he's trying to convey the idea of hey, when these people are talking like this to you on the streets of New York, it's not because they're dumb. They're very eloquent in their native tongue, and they're trying to learn a second language, you know? And I again, that seems odd. I love this. I love her giving him the little crucifix.
Trying to learn a second language while working fucking like 16 hours a day for a nickel.
Yeah, look at this. So Beppo, here, never fear my loved one, before a year I will send for thee. He's so eloquent here. And then, you know, in the title cards given in America, they're making him sound like the people, you know, they're giving him the voice you would make fun of, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's no sound in this, but they're writing the title cards to be Mamma Mia, that's a spicy meatball.
Yeah.
And I think that that's so important here. It's... I gotta be honest, sometimes, like, when I was rewatching this in prep for this, like, it is kind of tough to watch. You know, this year I went to Ellis Island, to their museum there, which is incredible. Tom, I texted you pictures from it.
Yeah.
How, like,
it's hard to watch because there's no fucking hope in this movie.
Well, but I just mean, like, for us, like, and, you know, people like, you watch this and you can't help but be like, someone in our line did this. Yeah. Like, this happened.
Yeah, it's very much close to home, you know. We have stories like this, you know.
Yeah, and
my grandmother was born in 29, so her parents did this.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, it's I mean, I've obviously, you know, I've done a ton of, like, genealogy research on my family, and that side it's hard to trace in some senses, but yeah, this was a journey that got made, and even for them, like, this was not a thing that was done voluntarily, right? This was not the kind of immigrant journey that we're taught in, like, grade school, where they just woke up one day and went, time to go to America for a better life. No, it was sad.
Yeah.
These people didn't want to leave. You know, they were either chased out by poverty, by bigotry, or in a lot of cases by... how do we put this? Unofficial governance, right? You know,
the mob.
Yeah, I mean, kind of like the Camorra, you know, that kind of thing. Where that's certainly what led to a lot of, you know, displacement. But you look at this, and I love this. I love this that, like, Beppo is sad. You know, he's certainly missing his love, but that it doesn't depict the immigrant ship itself as sad. That there is a sense of community here, which is so important, because I think, you know, today when you go into New York, like, there are certainly still regions that are called, like, Chinatown or Little Italy or things like that. But, you know, for people even our grandparents' age, Little Italy meant something because that was where the Italian immigrants went, and that was where the Italian community was. Here's the return of that shot.
Yep.
Oh, beautiful.
Good shot, good shit.
Yeah, this is just... I think that watching a movie like this really demystifies a film we're going to talk about next season, Griffith's The Birth of a Nation. Because you kind of... The way that people talk about The Birth of a Nation, you're led to believe that it was so unique in what it was doing, and that the other films of the time were so rudimentary. And you look at this from just June of the same year, and you're like, no, there were other filmmakers who were able to make evocative, powerful feature-length films with great shot choices.
No, it's just like we've talked about this before. Sometimes it's not about being first; it's about being the first. You know, like, he kind of just put all the ideas together into a package that, unfortunately, was a little more resonant in 1900s America.
But it's also,
we're racist assholes.
But it's also the rewriting of history with that, because the movie, you know, with Birth of a Nation, that was so immensely popular.
Yeah.
That people wanted to come up with other reasons for why they were going to see it. And like, oh, no, it's not just because of that. Like, Woodrow Wilson going... We'll get into it more next season. But, like, Woodrow Wilson... I think it's very significant that Woodrow Wilson screens Birth of a Nation at the White House and calls it History Written in Lightning. And this film from the same year that is much more about the actual American ideals and the failures of the American dream. That film kind of falls to the wayside of history, and it's a film that I think it's fair to say none of us were familiar with before the National Film Registry.
No.
and it's certainly not shown in schools, and it's not talked about.
But I think that's what I'm getting at is that America doesn't like dealing with the truth of our history. They want to rewrite it and make it more palatable to their beliefs. And at the time, rewriting history to say the KKK was good and black people were savage animals, that was more of a thing people wanted at the time. And unfortunately, it feels kind of like not much has changed. Look at the news.
And people forget that movie was controversial in its day too. History has rewritten around that film. But I say all that just to say, like, it is important to look at this movie in particular from the same year and just understand that, like, even then there were people who were fighting for and arguing for a more actually American America, a country that lived up to its ideals in that way, even back then.
It's putting up the mirror to the ugly realities of America. This movie
look at the hostility he's facing right now, fresh off the boat.
This is a movie that is, while, it doesn't have the hatefulness of Birth of a Nation born into it, but in a lot of ways it's more upsetting and nihilistic than Birth of a Nation, because if you fall on the side of being pro-Birth of a Nation, that's a movie that, you get excited about, and it gives you a happy ending for your beliefs. Like, there's nobody that watches this movie and goes, oh, no, there's a good way to read this. It's just bad.
This is also what I love, the fact that the incorporation of a slum boss. And by the way, if you look at, like, a letter in this movie, it says 1913. This is a contemporary film, and it's just calling out the local slumlords and the voting campaigns and all that.
And the Irish.
Yeah, well, the fact that, but that is, it's that kind of thing of, like...
Well, it's the hierarchy of the immigrant experience. Yeah. It's Gangs of New York, I love a lot of stuff in that movie because it kind of gets into that hierarchy of the, like, immigrant experience. The Irish came and they were the hated ones, and then what happens? The Irish become the cops. They get a piece of the pie, and then when the Italians come over, they treat the Italians like dirt, forgetting that they were treated like dirt.
You look at what Bill Corrigan is doing with his kind of voting campaign, and it's certainly something that was done to the Bill Corrigans of the world a couple decades before. That's why he knows it. This kind of technique, this isn't what you would necessarily call cooping. Oh, there's the word. He says, yep, have your WAP friends vote for this guy. But he says, cooping was something different. Cooping was like where guys would just round up drunks off the street and like throw them into rooms and be like, you're going to go vote 50 times. In fact, I don't know if you guys know this. That might have been what killed Edgar Allan Poe.
I wouldn't be
voting 50 times?
What?
Voting 50 times?
Yeah, you would take, like, drunks off the street, and you would make them wear a bunch of different disguises, because there was no way to verify who these people were, and just, like, go to voting halls in, like, taverns, and cast a bunch of votes for your corrupt alderman or whatever. By this point, it was less that, and it was more that was still happening to some degree, but, like, now you're just going into these immigrant communities, right? And just saying, like, hey, listen, pal, I'm your friend, right? I'm the guy that cares about the Italians or the Puerto Ricans or whatever, ethnic group you could find there. Toss the guy some money, right? Buy votes off of some people because they were, you could exploit people. And then, you'd ultimately screw them over. You weren't actually a friend of that community, right? You just knew they had no real power beyond going to the ballot box.
Yeah.
So they would just roll these immigrants. Now, he's a boot black here. He's a shoe shiner. Tom, did you have any shoe shiners in your family? Like, that was a very common trade for, like, fresh off the boat immigrants and such.
I don't think so, but I'm not 100% sure.
I'll tell you, my grandfather, he wasn't fresh off the boat, certainly, but my grandfather shined shoes. He still has his shine box. And, that is such an important part of obviously Goodfellas has the whole bit about go home and get your shine box, right?
Yeah.
And, because that is such a common story is the the Italian shoe shine, because that was the thing you could do. You could take a street corner, you could shine shoes, and before the stereotype that Americans had of Italians was organized crime, the stereotype they had was like the guy with the swirly mustache who would shine your shoes and sing a little ditty to himself,
Yeah. Maybe. I know my grandfather was older than my grandmother by, I think, 7 or 8 years, so his his father might have been one of those guys. I know he would end up being a sanitation worker, and he fought in World War II. He was a bomb disposal guy. He'd go in and disarm the mines in the fields and shit. So
I do love, but sorry, I don't interrupt, but I do love that the letter is in Italian at first before it translates. It's a nice touch.
Well, it's a nice touch, and it's kind of something that I feel like is a structure or a technique that I like when movies do, like in Hunt for Red October or Valkyrie, where you have it, the characters speaking in the language of the characters they're portraying as, and then it slowly transitions to English, so it doesn't,
and I think
distance the American audience.
I think the choice of juxtaposing Beppo being told, "Here's some money, get your WAP friends to vote," and then showing us Beppo's eloquent letter to his would-be wife, like, I think that's not just purposeful, that's powerful, I think.
I also kind of find it funny and interesting that every time we have a title card come up, it's Paramount Pictures, and what's maybe the most, what is the most famous movies that Paramount has ever created?
Yeah.
The Godfather trilogy.
Yeah.
And there's a lot in the first one, but mainly more in the second one, a lot of this movie in the story of Vito Corleone. And I think it's just interesting that Paramount may be the most guinea studio in Hollywood history. I just find it funny that Jesus Christ, 60 years after this movie, they make The Godfather.
I love this too, because there is this idea of, you've got the rich and powerful old man trying to steal Annette away, right? And that when the dad finally gets to turn her away, even he's happy about it, right?
Yeah.
I just love the look. I love Beppo's look in this too, with the hat and all. They don't make him they don't give him like the stereotypical mustache anymore.
He shaves the mustache, yeah.
Yeah, he shaves the mustache. When he's running up to that vessel, he looks more like Harold Lloyd, right? He looks more like, the peppy go-getter than he does kind of the ethnic stereotype, right?
Yeah.
And I love the first class passenger landing too. Like, he's really trying to show what, he's trying to do something nice, and the cop just, no, back in line, buddy.
Very typical cop behavior.
Yeah.
We're very pro-police on this podcast. We love the police. Even when they arrest us and make us take mugshots, we're very friendly.
I'm so... Tom, people are going to find... This is going to come up in people's YouTube algorithms. You have to be very careful with what you're doing. But I love the shot of... obviously this was... surely was just like a set that they built, but I love the way it comes off. You buy it. You believe the enormity of it.
Oh yeah, it's a good-looking movie in its ability to not be obviously good-looking.
Yeah.
It's not forcing itself upon you. It's just very much, hey, here's just
and I love
a movie.
I love the costuming and all of the people arriving, right? Because you can kind of see... the only thing that I struggle with a bit here, if we want to get technical, is that by this point, I believe... this is not necessarily where the ports would have been, right? Like those kind of... I can't remember, around 1915, whether we would have been doing arrivals at Ellis Island or at Castle Clinton, but either way, like, I'm curious to juxtapose this. In a couple seasons, or a number of seasons from now, we are going to cover a film in the registry that's just called Immigrants Arrive at Ellis Island, that is just real footage of people arriving off the boats. But... nevertheless, I do kind of love, like, even that, showing the guy taking off, because there used to be, you can read about it. If you're in New York, I highly recommend you can go to Castle Clinton. Most people go there just to get on the boat to the Statue of Liberty, but you can actually go there. They have a little museum about what Castle Clinton represented, and they're kind of upfront about the way that there were guys who would sort of hang out at the place where these immigrants would arrive, claiming to be their friend, and you really didn't know, like, is this person going to help them get a home, or is this person going to traffic them?
Wow.
Like, it was a very common practice. So when you see that scene, like for us now, it's probably easy to look at this and just go, "Oh, that guy's helpful. He's helping the marionette." But like when he goes to her, there, you know, especially if you know the time, you're like, where's this going? And I love the fact that Alderman Casey is the one to do the civil marriage. You know,
the Italians have a nice little get together, a little hootenanny.
Well, and that's the thing. It's the community. I mean, that's kind of one of the things I loved about a number of years ago, Brooklyn, right? The Saoirse Ronan film.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Was that it did just kind of convey, like, you know, there was a sense of community here. There was a sense of, oh, this is so cute.
Well, you know, that's just really one of the things that, you know, there's a lot of issues plaguing New York at this point. It's too expensive and all that, but it really is just it's the saddest thing is that it's all the personalities being sucked out of it. Everywhere you go, it's all of New York is starting to look the same, and we're kind of running all the communities out of their community and just trying to turn it into one giant fucking just, I don't know, Apple lobby. Like it's really just becoming a vacation spot for rich people and not a land where people would work. You know, how many times do we see like old interviews like resurface of guys like Jim Jarmusch or Abel Ferrara being like, yeah, we used to fucking, you know, have a loft that was like fucking, you know, $100 a month, and we could work like 10 hours a week, and that would be enough for us to pay for our lofts, and we can spend time doing art. And you know. Here's
real quick. A little thing I love is I love that the guy who owns the pawn shop is a character. You know, that they even give him personality. You're talking about New York having personality, and I do think that is something. Even though obviously this is not shot in New York, there is an effort to try and give it that flavor. You know, and look at this again to talk about the Harold Lloyd thing, right? Watch the way he runs. That's Buster Keaton. That's Harold Lloyd. Like, it's an effort to make him a relatable character and to make him somebody that the audience can look at and make Beppo just as universal as the Glasses character.
Well, it's also to, you know, track his downfall, that his arc is going to be so much more pronounced at the end than he was at the beginning. Like, he's not going to be the same guy at the end of this movie that he is in this scene, and it's you know, you can't even argue with the arc. It's very clear.
And this, too, I do love that it kind of jumps right from their wedding to the dawn of new life. And this, it's such a... God, especially when you know where it's going. This shot is emotional. This is rough.
Yeah, it's fucking tough, man. Like, it doesn't pull its punches in a way that, you know, it always surprises you that older movies would do shit like this. And I mean, fuck, it even feels like now we don't even get movies about the immigrant experience that are this kind of forthright with how tough and brutal it was, without being like, I don't know, comically edgelord with like the darkness. You know, this allows the characters to have a life and a light and a lightness to their touch before like the toughness arrives. Where, you know, I feel like if anything did it now, they would lean so hard in the grim aspects of everything, where you would just get fucking old and tired of it by the end of the movie.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing is it's and that in itself is a way to cope. That in itself is a way to
that's
help
where the community
detach.
comes in. It's that, you know, it's not to say that they had it easier back then, but there is something to the argument that, yeah, they may have been struggling for $1 and working themselves to the bone and everything, but at least they had people around them that were in the same boat, and they could help each other and lift each other up when they could. Where, you know, we're talking about New York's being stripped of its personality. There's that doesn't exist anymore. If you're poor in New York, you're alone. Like, you don't have anything, and it fucking sucks.
I mean, that's kind of the perpetual struggle with all of this, right? I mean, that's kind of, I mean, I have, there is an Italian store that I go to buy movies that we don't have in the U.S., in a neighborhood that used to, I mean, that store used to exist because Italian immigrants would come there to get their imported newspapers and all that because they just straight up didn't speak English, and there needed to be a store to serve that community. And that store still exists. It's still around, but it's not, they talk about, like, now they don't necessarily draw the same business because the children and the children's children and all of that, they not only have assimilated into mainstream American culture, but they don't speak Italian. They don't care about that stuff. They don't feel that need. This shot, just Beban here, right, is, I think, doing such an incredible job because he needs to play the simplicity of being wowed by your child without it slipping into, like, Hanks in Forrest Gump level, is he like me? You know what I mean?
Yeah, you never want to go full Hanks. Can't say the other word, but yeah. No, I mean, it's a great fucking scene, and it's heartwarming, and eventually it's gonna end up with just a mace in your heart.
Yeah, and I think it just sets up that emotion so well.
Oh, I got a shine on my shoe myself.
Well, I don't know if the guy getting the shine is Italian.
Nah, he's probably Irish, so he's probably so drunk he can't even speak English.
God damn you.
Can't edit it out, bitch.
No, he's just doing this because Because here's the thing that's worth noting. Kyle's Irish. I'm part Irish. Tom, not Irish, though. You would think he was. There's a lot of...
Are you Irish my whole life?
Look at that. There's something just so angelic about that baby. And, like, this I love, too. So you give us this title card, right? He's able to just like me, his hand stuck out his chin. Because when they repeat that and he's going out to other people and showing the hand, it's like, it's a way to just show how proud he is and how excited everybody else is for him, you know?
Well, new baby is a symbol of hope, symbol of change. Things might get better. You can give the kid a better life than you got. And... it's easy to understand why all these people get all excited about a kid that's not even theirs. It's just a new symbol of hope.
By the way, just for full, to make sure I plug it, I feel bad that I didn't plug it. SAS Italian Records Inc. in Bensonhurst. Check it out, folks. If you're looking for movies you can't get in the U.S., like a bunch of Roberto Benigni's films or things like that, or old records.
Or if you don't want to watch Roberto Benigni's films and get things that are watchable, they have other things there.
They do. They have plenty. I think I went in there like the week after Måneskin won Eurovision that year, and it was quite a time. It was aggressively joyful. It was great.
Look at my baby.
I like that little shot through the keyhole because that almost, that calls to mind it calls to mind the shot with the curtain opening earlier, and that's also going to call to mind a shot they echo later through a doorway.
Yeah.
That is profoundly upsetting, and I'm kind of already dreading when that pops up. If you're watching this for the first time, you can probably guess what we're hinting at. But
yeah, this one is not going to actually descend into the barrels of hell like a silent movie we covered a few weeks ago, but maybe a worse outcome for everyone involved.
Yeah, absolutely. No, absolutely a worse outcome for everyone involved.
Yeah, the one in hell actually comes back thinking things might get better. When we know...
I love everybody crowded outside. And I also like, even in this, when they're showing the community, right? Him doing the hand. The different degrees to which everyone's attire has assimilated, right? Because some of these men are still wearing the earrings, the mustaches, that kind of thing. Beppo has largely assimilated his attire, and in a sense, that's almost his downfall.
Because he believed in the dream.
Yeah, and he believed in Bill.
Yep.
In Bill Corrigan.
Don't trust the Irish.
God damn it.
You should never let me do anything you can't edit.
No. I love this, too. The physicality of him explaining the baby, and also just... I mean, let's say it, like, talking with his hands, which is entirely spot on. It really is.
It's right, and that's what I was saying before. Like, it really is a benefit to him that he doesn't have to speak, because it might be bad if we had to listen to like him doing an Italian voice, but the physicality is just dead on, and you can't really knock him for anything he's doing in that regard. Look at this fucking guy.
Well, I think that's it's still capturing. There is an effort here to kind of depict, quote unquote, the community. Midsummer grips the slums in a stifling embrace.
Better than Midsummer.
I mean, you're seeing, like this. I mean, again, this was just a detail of the time, but like that's so wild to see the ice cart, right?
Yeah.
That this was just a part of life here, and the desperation on their faces for the ice cart, I mean, it's silly to just sit back and keep going, this is how people lived, but it's wild to see it depicted in a contemporary sense. Like, that this is set in 1913. This is showing how people actually live.
Well, it's also, I mean, at this point, I think it's 1914 in the story.
Yeah,
but you gotta constantly remind people shit like this, because, I mean, we live in a world now where there are so many people that don't understand that cell phones didn't exist at one point.
Yeah.
Like, people can't comprehend a world that beyond their own experience. So they couldn't even begin to even fathom that there was a world without fucking air conditioning.
And I mean, when you see it depicted in something like The Godfather, right?
Yeah.
A period piece movie. You can kind of, a part of your brain looks at that and doesn't process it as real.
Well,
like, it kind of just goes like...
Because we know, De Niro, it wasn't around at that time, so there is a distance.
And also, everything. Maybe that's just stories you got told that were exaggerated or whatever, but when you have somebody making a film from that time, just showing you, like, not only was it like this, we knew it was like this at the time. Like, people going to the movies knew this is how people lived in the slums.
Yeah.
It's not just history, it's also not a hidden history either. It's not something that like, oh, well, we didn't realize it. No, we knew how bad it was for people. Like, we knew how bad this was.
Yeah, back then, people just, death was just a thing, medicine wasn't really advanced, and...
Well, I mean, that's...
a heat wave can just slaughter so many people. That's
what we're seeing here. Set aside the heat wave, it's the milk.
Yeah.
It's the milk thing. These people came from a country where where they just didn't, and that wasn't the way that impure. Yeah, the heat and the impure foods are wearing him out. You must buy him only pasteurized milk. I think about that a lot because there was this, even into like the 40s and 50s, right? I remember watching around the time that like Warner Brothers and Disney are making their World War II films.
Yeah.
That are like training you how to fly a bomber jet. They're also, especially Disney, making films that are targeted toward like South America and other countries that are just explaining like pasteurized milk and sanitizing your workstations and sanitizing medical equipment and shit. That were essentially just kind of going like, right, we have to share this kind of medical knowledge that we have with the rest of the world. We can't just kind of keep it for rich Anglo-Saxon Americans, little side convo here, but remember I feel like we're like the last age where this was a thing, but just remember like coming home from school or hanging out with friends and shit, and your mom would just be like, oh, have a glass of milk. Yeah.
What a disgusting thing we used to do. Like, just drink a glass of milk.
I want to note this because, Tom, you were talking about like a movie now would like lean into the darkness or whatever. Even a movie that's leaning into the darkness, quote unquote, wouldn't be doing this, which is showing you close-up shots of the baby after you've told us it's dying. Like, that's...
You know what this movie's reminding me of? Or at least this aspect of it, now that we're in the heat wave stuff and the immigrant experience and showing us this little corner of the world. This has given me very big do the right thing vibes.
Yeah, of course. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Especially just the danger of it. Like, I feel like we're even now, like, we were, a month or so ago, fucking LA was at, 110 degrees or some shit, like, maybe even 117, and we were just like, yeah, that's bad, but, like, if you stay inside, even, like, poor people, poor people with jobs, I should say, not homeless people. Like, oh, if you're lower class, you still have like air conditioning, you're fine. No, like in 1914, if you're not a rich motherfucker who could just pay the ice truck to just dump ice at your house, you are fucking struggling.
I love this too, that like he wants to save his child, of course. But I do love the way that they play this scene. It would have been very easy to have a woman run out to Beban and just go, your child needs pasteurized milk, and him going, oh, I need to get it. How do I have the money? But you almost see in his face this confusion still of like, the fuck? What is pasteurized milk?
Yeah.
Like, what is that? Like, I don't... Not even angry. Oh, this is heartbreaking. Oh, Jesus Christ.
Yeah, this is tough, and this is, again, one of the tough realities of
because we're talking
living in poor neighborhoods,
We're talking about the sense of community, and up until now, it's been a community where he could rely on people, right?
But desperation brings out the worst in folks, and there's always going to be people that are in a neighborhood and in a community that aren't actually really in a part of the community. They'll do shit like this, and just they're only out for themselves, and you get it. Desperation breeds horrible acts, but this, and us knowing what this means is fucking, it's tough.
And this is a rough scene. Again, you could have done a film where, I don't know, he just gets bonked on the head and he passes out and they take the money. But they make this beating rough, and they don't cut away. And I love the way that they, have the light cast down on him like this, And also the fact that they have the shadows of the bars on him, in a way kind of foreshadowing what him turning to the police is going to do. He wants to follow the rules and follow the system, and what happens?
Again, like, I make the jokes, but it is funny how, like, the movie is, like, anti-American and anti-cop.
Yeah.
It's very much, they're just an extension of America, and you can't trust any part of America. It's out to hurt you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
again, look at this. It's viscerally upsetting to see this baby knowing where, what they've told us, and a movie wouldn't do that now. Maybe they'd do like a silhouette or something, but they'd be like, oh, it's too upsetting for people. Even your quote-unquote edgelord dark movies wouldn't do it. Because it makes you feel genuinely sad and viscerally upset in a way you can't shy away from.
I also just think it probably has something to do with the fact that it's cinema so early. There's no rules for this shit just yet. Like, it's not like they're gonna shotgun the kid or whatever, but it's like, well, it's a story. The kid's gonna die. Like, we have to deal with that. Like, just that's just part of the story. We can't,
Well, and I think talking about part of the story, that's kind of what we're seeing here too. Is like, I think if you're a cinema goer even now, you're like, well, he lost the money, but surely something's going to come together.
The alderman will do something, or there'll be an It's a Wonderful Life type ending with the community bringing him money or milk or whatnot. But no, that does not happen. And look at these
spoilers for the first time viewers. But
look at these guinea cocksuckers drinking. I think that's the thing too that makes it even worse.
That they
stole it just for booze. They didn't steal it for their own edification to make their own lives better. They just not even drunk.
Look at this face that he makes. Like,
they don't even get drunk. They have one or two drinks and they're just la-di-da walking out fine.
The tears in his eyes, the desperation in his face. It is. This is what the close-up exists for, right?
Yeah.
Like that. He's just going for it.
It's so funny, too. Like, we're talking about, oh, well, surely there has to be something that the baby's got to be saved and everything. We just had that this summer with The Last Voyage of the Demeter. You know it's based on this book from Dracula where nobody on the boat survives, but there's a 12-year-old, maybe 10-year-old kid character, and you're like, well, yeah, everybody else will die, but the kid will probably be alright, right? They won't kill the kid.
I kind of love this title card because, again, he's been so eloquent when he's speaking in Italian, but he has to speak English to these men, and therefore he just seems... They look down on him because of it.
Yeah.
And he tries begging, too. I think that's the other important part, is he does try.
I mean, they really do set it up where you do want him to cave these fucks heads in.
Yeah, and you know what? The other thing is, like, it's a testament to Beban. His intensity in that scene is so good.
Yeah, his fucking veins are popping out of his fucking forearms.
He is tremendous in this, just throughout.
Here we go.
Yep.
The pig.
Tom's
and then he sees him... That's the thing, that he sees him reach into his pocket and just assumes, like, well, he must be stealing. And, like, the other thing is... Sir, you know guys are going into this neighborhood and rolling these immigrants. There's no way you don't. Well, also,
there's two of them and one of him.
Yeah.
It's not a typical fucking rolling scheme to go up to two guys and you only are the only one a part of the scheme. Like, fuck off, you dipshit, dopey fucking policeman. And now this fuck.
Yeah. For the record... Bill Corrigan, I didn't note this earlier. Bill Corrigan, who plays Leo Willis, the Irish word boss. It also appears in 1915's Hell's Hinges, which we talked about. Leo Willis, who plays Bill Corrigan, appears in Hell's Hinges from 1915, which is in the Registry, the William S. Hart Western. But also, he worked a lot with Laurel and Hardy and the aforementioned Harold Lloyd. You could spot him in Harold Lloyd's comedy, The Kid Brother. So, just kind of fun to know he played a heavy in much lighter fare as well. But yes, obviously he's, turned his back on Beppo has had, had this rejection and has now shoved the cop, which makes it worse for him, And to evoke Harold Lloyd, he's being dragged on this car. This is a stunt, Yep. This is except it's not played for laughs. And that these folks are trying to help him, too, in a way, and then the cop just drags him off. Leaving Annette to just not know what's happening. And, like, this is the thing you see depicted in film from, like, the first half of the 20th century all the time. Is the idea of, like, them just picking a guy up off the street and just tossing him in jail. It happens to Chaplin in modern times.
Yep.
And how devastating. I love, like, the juxtaposition between him being able to go back to... this daughter and what's going to be happening
in his giant house.
Beppo.
Yeah.
Oh, and this fucking scene.
Yeah. Heartbreaking.
Fucking just... Remember when we could make movies about, like, cops suck, don't trust them.
Well, it was the idea of just depicting systemic failure, right? And I think that, at this time, you look at something like this, what a fucking, this is a nightmarish scene. Just cartoonishly evil. And the hands reaching out of the bars are so evocative. But I do think that part of it is, at this time, Jesus. Yeah, this was the scene I was talking about earlier. This is the kind of counterpoint to looking through the keyhole to see the newborn child.
Yep.
And again, a movie today, you're not showing that coffin, right? Your edgelord darkness.
John Ford saw this movie, right?
Yep.
Like, that's straight up the Searchers.
Yep. And the woman shaking her head in the background. Again, this is just... It's a part of the community, a part of life, and it's seen as a tragedy.
Yeah, the new hope is dead.
Yeah.
Compounded by the fact that Beban's not even there. Beppo's not even there, excuse me.
But yeah, you were saying about, we used to be able to do movies like this. I do think, like, in the first half of the 20th century, there is this idea of I mean, yeah, in some senses you can make art about flawed systems, right?
Yeah.
But, and look at that, him at the bars is incredible, and that Irish shopping up. But you can make movies about, like, flawed systems that are mostly coming from an angle of, this is supposed to work, and people are failing it, and they're failing, like, the American ideals. And I think where things start to go awry is both people start associating, like, saying that we're not living up to the American ideals with, like, you know, anti-American, like, communist sentiments and things like that, get swept up in that Cold War panic, and then additionally, you know, it comes along again in, like, post 9/11, this idea of, like, if you say, hey, the system is broken, let's fix it, people take that as, I guess you hate the system. It's like, these don't have to be mutually exclusive.
No, but I think that's what, like, you even get, like, up to, like, the 70s, early 80s, you could still make TV shows and movies where it's very much, no, the cop's a bad guy, or when a cop shows up, you instinctively kind of recoil because you're like, oh, this isn't going to go well. I mean, Jesus Christ, like, even dopey dipshit shows like the Dukes of Hazzard were all about, the cops are bad, don't trust them, they work for the money, it's not... It's really the 80s. It's, you know, every fucking problem comes back to Reagan, where he instills that idea you were talking about into people. Oh, you can't criticize America. You can't say this. That's anti-American.
Just look. I just want to take a moment to acknowledge this shot and the choice of having the stairs that way, where you can just, you get to see Beban coming in shell-shocked from what he went through.
Yeah.
And you get to watch that dividing line of the railing where the woman just, she's afraid of what he's going to find when he gets up there.
But, you know, just even getting to, like, maybe the biggest show of the 80s was Miami Vice, right?
Yeah.
But people got so media illiterate at that point that they thought, oh, it's pro-cop, it's very colorful and all that. When, if you watch Miami Vice, a lot of the show is about they fail by the end. Yeah. They don't achieve what they want. So it's kind of even saying, like, yeah, like, you may want to root for these guys, but they're not actually doing their job.
So here, I mean, this is just the performance here by both of them, by Clara Williams and George Beban, is just. I mean, you can call it silent movie acting by saying it's so big, but it's just trying to. It's trying to reach you.
Well, that's just how Italians act. We're a very dramatic people.
But it is true. That is. It's not... That's what I'm saying. Like, it's not just silent acting. It's trying to basically take what some might look at as overacting and give it humanity. You know? I think that's what's so important about this. Not to mention, like, I think too often people call depictions of grief or... distress on film, they call it unrealistic when it's exactly how people act. You just don't want to confront it.
Well,
because
it's also the fact
dignified.
that not everybody reacts the same way. So just because you see somebody in a movie act big in a grief moment doesn't mean it's unrealistic. Some people get quiet. Some people go fucking insane. Like some people find 1,000 different layers in between. You know.
And nobody's honest about how they themselves would act either.
Because people are full of fucking shit. It's so much of shit like that, criticisms like that, come from people that haven't lived fucking life.
Like, look at the way that...
He doesn't want to find out.
Yeah.
He doesn't.
Yep.
But he has to.
That's what's so powerful, is the little pause there.
If he doesn't pull back, maybe it's not true.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anybody that says shit like that's a fucking moron. I gotta tell you, like... You know,
and this, like, you can chalk it up to silent film acting, but it's also just, I mean, part of it is he has to physicalize what's internal, right? Because it's, you know, the alternative is having a character just loudly speak what they're feeling. Not to mention, like, you know, especially with this, he's acting so big, he's reacting so much, not just because of the death he's trying to process, but after what he's just been through for a week.
And the fact that what he's been through caused this.
Yeah.
That, not that it's his fault, but just, you know, if he did one thing differently, if one thing went his way or whatever, like, maybe the kid still would have died, but maybe he could have been there with for the funeral or whatnot. You know, it's just it's the dominoes of life, the cosmic dominoes. One falls over and just you can't stop the wave that's about to come.
And for all of the talk that we just had about like the big performances, this is so small and sincere from both of them. Just
well, yeah, he can't even comprehend it.
No, and the very slow iris going in is great because it just makes us focus on him and his processing. And now it's a month later, and he was seemingly moving forward, and yet now he sees this. Corrigan's child near death.
Mm-hmm.
And I love this.
This is even front page news.
Yep. And Dr. Briggs, the world's famous specialist, is today directing the fight to save the infant. So it's, you know, it's the idea of like that there. I think before now, right? Before now, Beppo probably didn't even realize there was a way to there were these kind of resources, right?
Yeah. He's
not even thinking about, is there a world famous doctor? No, he's just like, well, this is just a part of life. And understanding that the tools to help people like this exist. That's as much what he's dealing with as the fact that this guy screwed him over. And this too, Corrigan, through political influence, has the street roped off around the house to prevent the slightest noise. Again, that this was contemporary is still so striking. That this was this blunt and this direct.
Where do you think Corrigan lives?
I don't know.
Do you think this is Long? Do you think this is Nassau? Maybe Westchester.
Maybe, or remember at this point, it was 1915. Not all of Manhattan or Brooklyn has been like.
It might be Brooklyn because even now Brooklyn still has homes.
Staten Island.
Maybe Staten Island.
You know,
I would say probably Brooklyn. Maybe if we want to lean into how he's just not a part of the community, I would even go Long Island because Long Island just is not. At this point though, Long Island is. There are some Long Island mansions, but at this point, Long Island is like farmland still. So it's probably Brooklyn.
Yeah, I was going to say it's probably. You go down.
Especially for him to be able to get there.
You go down like Ocean Parkway, you'll see a lot of still like big houses there.
That's what I'm saying. Brooklyn still is a lot of homes. You know, Brooklyn is not buildings yet. It's still not buildings yet. But what? My dog is wheezing. What are you doing? So exhausted dealing with Michaela all weekend. Got a wheeze.
Disguised as a peddler, Beppo seeks his revenge in the home of Corrigan. That's another interesting thing, I think, is that in a way, the fact that Beppo needs to disguise himself to get through, that he feels, that there's something, he's not even changing his face, but he just needs to change his attire to seem like he can pass through this. And even then, it doesn't totally matter. It's just about the cop chasing somebody.
I also think it's interesting that the movie, it says he's seeking his revenge, and you think that means he's he'll bash Corrigan's head in, and then it gives you a little different idea of what his revenge actually is, and you go, oh boy, that is dark as fuck. But I think all this shit's very fascinating, and I guess we'll get to it. What I was kind of hinting at before, just kind of like the Italian experience, and what we see here is what America treating Italians in such a way that it's pretty much why they formed the American version of the mafia. It's sort of a way to protect themselves from a government that has no interest in them, right? And it's sort of like America created its own enemy, and that's kind of what's happening here. This fucking corrupt government official created this guy who's going to try to kill his daughter. And I think it's interesting that this is 1915, that we're still a ways off from the Depression, which is basically a government-created problem that supercharges the mafia. You know, the mafia wouldn't be a thing that dominates pop culture, that is a thing that we still talk about, if it wasn't for the government, treating Italians like dog shit for, the 40, 50 years before the Great Depression of them immigrating here. And then the government creating this gigantic problem that then the Italians can take advantage of and say, hey, you guys made your bed.
And also the idea of, like, that essentially by leaving the slum areas to be extorted and exploited, right?
Yeah.
They left these people to create their own quote-unquote justice system, right? And that's true not just in America, that's also true in Italy where it began, The idea of, hey, if the local government's not going to look out for us, we have to turn to somebody who can.
We got to do it for ourselves. And even now, like, yeah, there's still, it's still mainly Irish, the police force. Yeah, you'll still get some Italians there, but like the Italians really never in mass became police. It really either became, they're either going to become mobsters, or they're just going to live their lives working and just not trusting the system. Like, I joke about this shit all the time, but I legitimately didn't know that the conversation, that black parents have with their kids about police, my parents had that conversation with me. I didn't know that was a thing that other people didn't have, so I think it's a thing that even now a lot of
stuff gets embedded.
Think. Yeah,
that stuff gets. I mean, this is the origin of. I mean, not this film, but like
no,
this
but
is
because my father grew up. He came of age. He was 12 in 1970. He grew up in the worst time in New York, where it was a war zone, and it was all the cops. They were all Irish, and if you were Italian, if you were out of your neighborhood, or even if you were in your neighborhood, but the cop was just being a prick, we're gonna fuck you up, we're gonna ruin your day, and if you give us 1 fucking inch, we're gonna ruin your life.
Yeah, and it's like, but I mean, like, even now, right? You look at certain. I guess the thing is, like, one thing that's so fascinating in a way is you talk to people now who are like Italian American, people we know, people we went to school with, and they harbor a lot of the sentiments that come out of this period without any real knowledge of the period, that they don't have, they lack the connection to a Beppo or anything like that, and it just kind of becomes, being anti-establishment or anti-system because, I don't know, it feels cool or whatever, and it's like, well, no, there's a real root to this, and if you lose your connection to a Beppo, you stop being able to see yourself in other communities that are going through this right now, right? Yeah. And that's what I think is so vital, is that while this is the movie called The Italian, it's, I'm going to steal a title of a Chaplin. This is the story of the immigrant, right? Yeah. The Italian element of it doesn't really matter as much. The specificity here is important because of the band's performance.
No, but it's just about the immigrant experience. It's about how the American dream's a failure, like we said. It doesn't have to be an Italian. It's just kind of like, it just so happens at the time that Italians were such a big immigrant,
This I want to make sure we don't ignore, which is the entire thing he has to go through here, right? This entire process he has to go through from the minute he looks down. Mm-hmm. And just, he was so fired up. He was so ready to do this until now. And now he's got and I love the motif of him opening the curtains, right? Because how did this thing start? We were using, when George Beban, the man, is in his room, right? We're using curtains as like a theatrical thing. And now we've got Beppo opening the curtains. I mean, symbolically opening the curtains in a way to kind of tell us, like, all right, we're not keeping this in the shadows anymore. Like, we need to talk about how these people live. We need to talk about how the way this is all going down. And I mean, that's the thing. He had his moment of doubt, and now you can see he's steeling himself for this. You know, I mean, that's what I think is so impressive. And they're downstairs, have no idea what's going on. And it's the hand.
Yep.
It's the hand under the chin. Yeah, that is that. I feel bad for anybody who's listening to this audio only, as we just kind of all freeze to take this in. But it's just such a.
They made their bed. Fuck them.
It's such an exceptional performance from Beban, and I feel like nowadays doing these kind of flashbacks might seem hack, but I love the way that it's kind of coming at it from another angle and just.
Well, the only thing I would say is that I don't mind the flashback. I just don't think you needed the title card if you were going to do the flashback.
Yeah, that's fair.
It's gilding the lily a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I you know what? Tell you what, take it up with Thomas Ince and shove him off a boat.
Who says I didn't?
Yeah, maybe that's the cat's meow too. We got the other conspiracy theory going. But yeah, I do think one of the things that I like about this film so much is obviously it's built around George Beban, and I do like that it's giving him room to perform.
Yeah.
It's not cutting so often or relying too much on title cards or anything. And then him just back to the curtain again. This is a brutal title card. At the eternal bedside of his baby, where hate, revenge, and bitterness melt to nothing in the crucible of sorrow. And that's.
Do you think the doctor told Corrigan his kid was going to die? He looked like he had the reaction of bad news.
That's the interesting thing. It's not. I love that they don't tell us.
Yeah, they don't tell you. So that's why I'm saying, like, do you think the kid's going to die too?
I don't know, because we did get the doctor saying 1 more hour of silence, and I think I can save them. So.
But just the way just the way Corrigan reacted looked like he just got bad news.
Yeah.
Feel good stuff.
Yeah.
Some real
but I love this. The last page of the novel, and then we're back to George Beban as George Beban, just trying to process it.
Just to process the idea that Italians exist.
But I mean, really, like the fact that it ends so sad, like so bleakly, and then we're closing the curtains again.
Yeah, game over, man.
Yeah.
Shit's tough.
Yeah, I mean, it's just unrelenting. I think that's what's so remarkable about it is that it's.
Yeah, at a certain point, it just passes like the Rubicon and becomes just nothing but misery. And, good times. Everyone's happy. Good thing I don't have a ton of alcohol in my house.
So with that, I think the only thing left for us to do, Kyle, do you want to say the magic words?
Boys, time for the registry picks. A reminder to our listeners, it must be an American film that's at least 10 years old.
So for me, there were a lot of different ways to go. There have certainly been films made about the immigrant experience. But one of the things I was thinking about with this film is that in 1915, when we're depicting the immigrant experience, it is so brutal. We were just talking about how unrelenting it is, right? And for a while after that, the idea of the immigrant experience gets sanitized, right? We move away from the hardships, right? It isn't until, the 60s, 70s, 80s when the grandchildren of immigrants are starting to reckon with what that means, right? The children of immigrants, they were just trying to make a life for themselves. But the grandchildren are starting to reckon with what that means. And while America in the 80s is trying to celebrate the immigrant experience, we're reopening Ellis Island, Statue of Liberty, all of that stuff, there is an attempt to try and grapple with what that entails and kind of tell the story of the waves of people that came here in the Jewish diaspora and the Italian diaspora. And that's why one of the more remarkable works that comes out of that, there are a lot of films that have tried to reckon with that since these, the off-the-boat immigrant experience that I think, like you talked about, Tom, go too hard into the try-hard darkness or too much in, like, the optimism of, like, we're going to make our way in America. It is a testament to how impressive this film is that Don Bluth, the great animator who had worked for Disney and then left Disney, was able to make a film that both makes the immigrant experience accessible to children without shying away from the hardships of it. I mean, to watch An American Tail from 1986, to watch that as an adult and to realize just how much a moment like There Are No Cats in America really speaks to it really conveys to children the difficulty of the immigrant experience in America and what that was like and the promises that were made and the deceptions that came with that. It is a remarkably impressive film. The story of Fievel, coming to America and the difficulties he faces. It is, it's very blunt about anti-Semitism. It's very blunt about a lot of things that you wouldn't expect, and I don't think anybody who didn't have the cachet of Don Bluth could get away with, and I don't think anybody trying to make an animated film at any period beyond a creative lull for Disney that was the mid-'80s could get away with. But for a brief window, we were able to do this and depict this in a way that I think is genuinely, weirdly, An American Tail is within the pantheon of American immigrant stories in a really remarkable way. So that's all to say. That's my pick. I think Don Bluth as a filmmaker needs to be represented in the registry and his work outside of Disney in that regard, and also just what An American Tail means as an educational tool and a culturally significant work.
So for me, I kind of just wanted to get something that focused on a very, in a specific way, a community that is not, the typical white, waspy, whatever, bullshit we tend to get in movies. I wanted a very specific minority group. So I went with one that I think is great. It's kind of a low-key masterpiece. It's a landmark in its way. Kind of created its own visual language that it's crazy that this guy only directed one movie. He was a music video guy. He directed one movie, and you would have thought, oh, he'd be doing shit forever and, bringing his thing to cinema for a while. I think the way Belly looks at the African-American community in New York and the way drug dealing kind of becomes a way of life, a life raft in many ways, but also is a millstone, and it can kind of bring a wedge between people in the community that you're with them at a point, but then you're against them, and you guys go in different ways. But then it has this honest look at the gangster lifestyle, but it also has this humanity to let to get to an ending that isn't the typical moralistic kind of blaxploitation ending you would expect, where all the drug dealers, they die and blah blah blah, and it's a life of crime, doesn't lead to anything good. But it kind of has a more interesting, honest, sad but not completely nihilistic and moralistically finger waving. A lot of these movies do. Belly is a landmark in African American cinema. It's one of the best movies of the 90s, just for how impactful it was. Nobody's gonna write home about Nas's acting. He's fine, but this is really DMX's movie. It's a shame he was never able to escape his demons, because he was actually a pretty good actor when he would show up in movies. But you also get kind of Method Man's first acting performance, real performance outside of his cameo in Copland. You get Method Man, and he's kind of really become bigger than he is as a rapper. He's big. He's a great actor. And again, like you're gonna be hard pressed to find a movie that looks as good as Belly. They just put out a 4K disc of that movie that is kind of an eyeball melter. It's kind of one of those reference discs that'll show you what 4K can do. I think we've seen in recent years the registry's making a real push to have more inclusion in the registry and show that there's more to the canon than just white guys and their white stories. Belly, I think, needs to be in there. I think maybe the best movie about rap and hip-hop and maybe I'd have to do a little deeper, but I think it's up there. And when it comes to the 90s, you're going to be hard-pressed to find something as impressive as Belly. Hype Williams really knocked it out of the park with this one, so that's my pick.